Okay, so welcome everyone to this final panel of today. Tackling key challenges when it comes to Cardano on-chain governance. Yes, I mean, you've heard many different, let's say, many different stuff, like from Nicholas' journey when it comes to the DREPs and the parameter changes. You've heard many different things also from Lloyd when it comes to the annual budget. Professor Tazone just provided also some information when it comes to the on-chain governance design. And there were some very good questions provided. But I think having a panel today and the design, the way we designed it, we try to really wrap everything up into this, let's say, informative discussion that we want to take you along with us. I think the best thing to do really is allow the panelists to really introduce themselves. So start from left to me, for me, Einstein, and we'll follow through Nicholas and then Lloyd. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hey everyone, so nice to see all of you engaged in governance. I'm Jason Hansen, the Civics Committee in Intersect Constitution Council member, also doing a core working group for infrastructure, SPO, been around since 2017, really passionate about governance.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas Czerny. I'm the governance lead at the Cardano Foundation. I'm also a Civics Committee member and part of the Governance Parameters Working Group in Intersect. And I just try also to help people around in Intersect and also around governance in the community in general. I host, well, I say weekly spaces, but it's not really weekly. I try to do it weekly. Governance education sessions on X, where I just share what's currently ongoing. And I'm just incredibly humbled to sit between these two legends.
Thank you, Nico. And it's always an honor to be up here with you guys as well. These are some of this, just the hardest work in Cardano has been done by these guys. So it is absolutely an honor and a privilege to be around this group and be a part of this. I'm Lloyd Duhan. I'm the host of GM Cardano. We say governance matters Cardano because we're trying to make sure that we're informing and educating the community as far as what the governance issues are in Cardano and how to improve them. I'm a Cardano ambassador, and I have been in the ecosystem since about 2020. I'm founder of Drip Drops, and now I'm the subject matter expert for the Intersect Cardano Budget Committee.
Okay, pleasant. Thank you all for joining and agreeing to join in this panel as well. And we're really looking forward to, learning from you and receiving your insights. First up, I think just to set the stage, it's really important that the panelists understand we've been hearing CIP 1694 governance, on Cardano's on-chain governance model. Can we give just a high-level overview of what that really is, what it really means? So I think let me look at you there, Nicholas, and then we can, you guys can also interact with that. Correct.
Yeah, gladly. So CIP 1694 is the Cardano improvement proposal that defines this on-chain governance model that we're currently implementing, or we're in the middle of the way of implementing. And the key themes about CIP 1694 are you have three roles. We have a tricameral governance model with delegated representative, DREPs, stake pool operators, and the constitutional committee. So these three roles are the actors within this governance system. And then how do they actually govern, how do they make decisions, is via governance actions. And there are 7 different governance action types. And at least 2 of these 3 roles that I before mentioned need to vote on each action type. Yeah, and really to break it down, it's a stake-based voting system. So it's 1 Lovelace, 1 vote, 1 Ada, 1 vote, if you want to call it like that. Mm-hmm. Did I miss anything?
No, absolutely. So to add to that, it's really been a transition process. So we went from 7 Genesis keys where the different 3 entities could vote, and 5 out of 7 could do treasury withdrawals, or they could do, it's called move instantaneous rewards, and they could do hard forks. But now it's actually in the hands of the community through the strike-party system, right? But ultimately, it's actually the ADA holder holding all of these people accountable. And for me, that's also like the essence of it, because yes, it's one ADA, one vote, and that's needed because in a blockchain you have security parameters you have to think about. And if you could vote with more voting power than the ADA you hold, you could potentially break those security parameters. So that's one side of the governance, is like ensuring that this trustless blockchain system works in a trustless way. But the other side of it, that's created through all of these governance actions, 7 in total, is actually a lot of potential for inclusiveness. So anyone can pull together their resources. It's quite a significant amount you need to put a governance proposal out, but it's only a deposit and it gets returned. And anyone can be part of the rationale in this discussion of that. And what we'll probably go into later in this discussion is like, there's a really nice interaction between on-chain and off-chain processes. You can, for example, take a treasury withdrawal, you can get ADA from that, and that could be distributed through programs such as Catalyst, where you only need a small amount of ADA to be able to vote and no ADA to be able to participate. So the other side of the coin is this inclusiveness that's actually generated through the possibilities of these 7 actions.
I think the only thing I'd add to that, SIP 1694 is the gateway drug to governance. It's how we got here. It's what got us started and got us moving down this path. It's now being replaced. That's ultimately what's happening. SIP 1694 is being replaced by the on-chain governance of Cardano. The Constitution will now reign supreme.
Lloyd, you just mentioned Constitution. So I was wondering, when is someone going to mention the word Constitution? To be honest. And the thing is, I'm going to look at you now, Lloyd, when it comes to the Constitution.
Okay.
What is the purpose? Because we know that, okay, we have this idea now of on-chain governance. What is it exactly? But a Constitution? Why is that needed?
There's an interface with the blockchain, and we're all aware of that. That's the ledger, right? The ledger, it is immutable. It's what we can all trust in. But we're also people, and so there's a wetware layer that's just not covered by that ledger. It can't be. So we have to talk about how we would interact with one another, how we would set guardrails around the changes that we would make. And so the Constitution is a combination of those elements. It's the people processes that are called out, and it's the range in which the protocol parameters can be changed safely so that we can continue to exist. The very first Longmont SIP 1694 conference, I went there with one goal in mind, and I wanted to make sure everybody knew it, was that I wanted us to build a constitution with the idea that the blockchain had the right to exist. And by starting from that foundation, then all of the other rules we put in, it starts from that fundamental idea that it has the right to be here, and if we were to do something that would destroy it, that would be against the rules. So that was where I came. That's what I came with to SIP 1694 in Longmont the first time, and I'm proud to say it's in there in its own way. It's got its own life breathed into it, that we do ensure that the blockchain continues to exist through our actions.
Right. Sure. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, just to build on what Lloyd said, a constitution or something like that, right, is also necessary for us as a community to really formalize our values, our principles, and what we stand for. Because everyone has an idea that is in Cardano. Like, I'm here because of decentralization. I'm here because I want to bank the unbanked and things like that. And the Constitution can be a vehicle through which we as a community formalize these ideas, right? And of course, right, that can have some trade-offs in a way, let's put it like that.
Course,
if you have
yes.
introduced ambiguity, if you introduce too many principles, they can be contradictory, right? But we as a community need to or should understand what do we stand for, and where else would you put it than the Constitution?
And it has to be alive. So there's some great constitutions in countries where none of it is real, where none of it is practiced. So for me, that's also the essence of it. It's not going to be a great constitution for all of us. It's going to be something that's alive for all of us, and we make those compromises through all those workshops we have done. We are going to have a draft of the constitution being ratified by 60 different workshops across the world that's sending their delegates. And that type of compromise and swarm thinking really nails it for me. This like integration between on-chain and off-chain processes, creating those on-chain verifiable governance actions. So let's take an example. So the guardrails. So we have in the guardrails limits on how large the Constitutional Council can be. That's something that's expressed as a will through all of these discussions by people. So it's fully auditable, it's fully transparent. It's a new way of doing constitutions. It's scripted, or almost it's automatic, but it's expressing the human layer that you were talking about.
Very good.
Interesting. Thank you all, by the way, for just contributing to that. Lloyd, you mentioned the Constitution as setting the guardrails.
Yes.
Nicholas, you mentioned the Constitution as formalizing, your principles. And Einstein, you also mentioned it's like, hey, making sure it's a living thing. I think that's right. You're right. But why am I saying this? It brings me immediately, really, to like some challenges that we face, that we will face, and we cannot turn a blind eye to that. We have to challenge those. We have to have a platform where we can discuss that, come in as a community together. In August, I think we all, probably the majority of us here can remember that. There was a pitch deck that was leaked.
Yeah.
Particular project who is planning to request 13% of the treasury. That's a significant amount. That's, let's say, amounts to roughly 200 million ADA. A single project requesting that. Now, it did cause quite a stir because it's the first time that the community was confronted with, hey, now we know of this idea, the treasury is now open, being accessed, available, but there's no one who really had ever come forth before that point. Should something like now having access to the treasury or allowing treasury withdrawals, should that not come with certain limits? Should there not be, let's say, from the community, a set budget, annual budget put in place that kind of like defines or limits how much that can be withdrawn? I'm just curious to hear your take because we've heard about the Constitution, guardrails, formalizing living, but now here's a live living example. So curious to hear your thoughts.
I could take that one. The current role I'm fulfilling is the subject matter expert on the budget in the Intersect MBO. So it actually does, in fact, the Constitution calls out that Cardano shall have an annual budget. It's written right there in the Constitution. So we've decided to find a process. We know we had to build a process, and we needed to determine what that process would be. So part of what we did at Intersect was, what will that be? And we started back in July of this year writing the comprehensive annual budget process. It's about a 50-ish page document. It's published, it's public, it's under the Apache 2.0 license, so it's fully open source. And we laid out a process that we felt would work to meet that obligation of the Constitution that we have an annual budget process. So there's also another thing that it calls out called a net change limit. And that's where that particular project would have run up against. And by the way, I know the owners of the project. I knew them, I've met them, they talked to me, they'd even shared some of the information they were talking about with me long before it leaked. This was months and months back, that was something they were interested in pursuing. And it's like, well, you're at a time you're gonna have to socialize it with the community because that's a conversation we'll all have to have. Unfortunately, the conversation happened not when they were ready. And that is really unfortunate for them. They have good ideas, and maybe they could have scaled it down and found a way to do it scaled down. I don't know. We've already, now that the sort of the cat's out of the barn, we don't know, we can't put it back in.
Yeah.
So, but we did end up with a good process that we are now following. We actually announced the process and what we expected the first annual budget to look like for all of Cardano. We came up with a number between 300 and 500 million. We're in a range there still because the finals are not all decided. But that number, if you look at what has gone into the Treasury in 2024, it's about 425-ish million is what we're projected to do at the end of the year, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
That number is just living within our means. So we could safely spend that without ever touching the principle of what's in the Treasury. So that seems a very acceptable level to bring everyone to the table and say what needs to be built, and let's build it. And that's the process we're in now, is everyone comes to the table and says this is what's needed for 2025 to keep the lights on and to build the next models.
Exactly. Correct me if I didn't hear you well. Did you say between 200 and 300 million ADA?
No, I said 300 and 500 million.
300 and 500 million ADA.
That's the range that's safe based upon treasurers of the foundation, of IO, of other companies that do this work. That's a range of safety that was given. And it's because it's somewhere around the number that's actually coming into the Treasury on an annual basis. So that's why it's a safe number to work with.
Okay, Einstein, sure.
Yeah, can I add to that? So I think it was a really healthy response from the community. First of all, we saw and demonstrated how if you're going to ask money from the Treasury, you need legitimacy. You need to build this process, this off-chain process, to be able to get response from the community. You call it socializing, you call it an off-chain process, but we're talking about the same thing. And the other thing I think it really raised the question of is like, are we having a single type of Treasury actions? Because one of the principal questions they asked is like, should you return money that's invested and you actually pay back to the Treasury to keep it even more sustainable? So I saw it as a very healthy response from the community, and I saw it as basically an acceptance of the process that's outlined in the Constitution with this like info budget action, and then actually doing a Treasury withdrawal. So I really saw it as a healthy response.
Sure. Nicholas.
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree with you. And it really, when I saw the backlash and everything, I mean, it was poor communication. And of course, I mean, that something gets leaked is unfortunate, right? But the reaction from the community, it really showed me that, okay, those people are ready to, be diligent when it comes to any kind of action, right? If any actor comes in and proposes a questionable change, I mean, I guess even with a parameter, right?
Yeah.
The community reacts, and it's very, very good that happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with this answer because it also brings me to a follow-up question. It's a challenge. If it's between 300 and 500 million, here is one single project requesting 200 million. That means, let's say the outcome is 500 million as per Constitution, right? That means there's only 300 million left to be divided amongst other potential hundreds of projects. So is that a challenge? I mean, should we not define what a max that should be per project? Because if, let's say, an influential entity would request substantial amount of that amount of budget, that would mean that others left out.
That's right. We do have a pie that we can pull from. We're talking about sustainability ultimately, right? So we're talking ultimately about the real world scarcity of our asset and utilizing it in a safe and effective manner so that it continues to be here for us for many years to come. So yes, that's the consideration that's happened, which is why we needed a budget process, which is why once we knew the number, we then also did design buckets, and we designed the buckets around, for 2025 particularly, we designed the buckets around things we're already doing successfully. So we didn't want to innovate in that space yet because we need to take baby steps. Actually, I believe it was on the last panel, like the last slide was that you're going to do it wrong the first time anyway.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Like, I understand it fundamentally. I've been saying, let's give everybody grace. I've been saying, let's work together through this first year and learn the lessons we need to learn. So the 5 buckets that we designed for this year are just the things we're already doing as a community. So.
Amazing. Sure.
Yeah. So it also raises some interesting questions. Like, let's say there's a limit and you put it in the constitution. So what happens if there's a contingency? What happens with the order of things? So is it only the one that was first that actually has that access? So what the constitution is currently reflecting is more of the principles, like making sure it's you have accountability, you have transparency of it, you have a full legitimate process for developing that budget. And that's how we secure it, not through the set limit itself, because you never know, there's a black swan event, you never know, you need a contingency funds. And hopefully we're all even in this luxurious position where we actually are spending, we have so much resources, we don't need to spend as much either, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, it's sustainability, right? And what does that mean for the treasury is that while we need to maybe in the beginning, right, spend a little bit more, ultimately, the treasury is what's going to continuously fund the operation of Cardano, right, and sustain the continuous development of Cardano, which is now possible through this governance model. So ultimately, right, while we may need to spend more in the beginning, right, the treasury ideally should be able to fund the continuous operation for decades or centuries even, right? Let's be optimistic. Centuries.
I like that. Definitely being optimistic. And I like also what you said there, Lloyd, is that being gracious, understanding that we might not get everything good, well, perfect the first time. There will be mistakes along the way, but at least let's learn from those mistakes, right? Like that. I'd like to move to the following segment, which has to do with balance of power and governance. And what risks do we face if individuals or entities partake in multiple branches of governance roles? I'm not going to specify that, but it depends on your answers. I'm curious to hear because we've spoken earlier, so I'm going to leave that up to you, Einstein.
I can start off first.
Yeah.
So I want to give an overview first. So keep in mind that there are some built-in protections. So in the Constitution, there's the role of the Constitutional Committee. They can only vote on the constitutionality of governance actions. So they have a limited role. They cannot vote on anything else. If they do, they're held accountable through the ADA holder who can vote no confidence. Then you have the SBO. They are limited to the hard fork and the protocol parameter that's related to security, right? And then you have the DREP who have this more wider remit. And that is where I put a lot of my effort into, because I think this is the place where really that conflict of interest that could potentially arise is important to tackle in some way. And I already said that you can hold the Constitution Council accountable, but you can do the exact same thing because it's a delegated representative, so it's the ADA holder holding you accountable. But for that to be effective, you actually, as an ADA holder, need to be informed about your delegated representatives. And how do you do that? Well, you can, for example, create a code of conduct. That's something I've been working on with workshops. And what I identified there together with all of the other people discussing is like, there's some key elements you need. You need some form of way of knowing the identity or the person or the affiliations. So it might be okay if you're both a staking pool operator and a delegator, if you are identifying this in your affiliations, and then it's actually up to the ADA holder to decide if that's a good thing. Because you can see on the one side, being a staking pool operator actually contributes a lot. You have this great technical knowledge of the infrastructure, and you're able to really effectively vote as a delegate representative as well. At the same time, there's a truth to this. I believe Ken Ladd did a study recently, said like, of the 1 million or higher delegate representative, 57% of them are also staking pool operators. So it's really clearly a case of many SPOs also being DREPs. How do we ensure that how they vote is also effective governance, is in the interest of everyone, not just themselves as a staking pool operator when they are operating as a delegate representative? Well, you describe it in your voting process. You say if you are a staking pool operator, you say how you plan to vote on those things, or if you're going to abstain from voting on those things.
Interesting. Nicholas, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with what Einstein said. And just to think about it, right? Because sometimes the question comes up, why do we even allow for people to be a DREP or an SPO? And if I say we, I mean the protocol or a CC. The thing is, if you introduce identity into the mix and basically have permission, right? Who can be a DREP, who can be a CC member? It's a double-edged sword, because that can quickly turn very, very negative and questionable. So for me, right, it's the self-sovereign ADA holder who is able to make good and informed decision. And what that requires, as Einstein said, is that they're educated, that they know what's happening, that they know what is the Constitutional Committee doing. Are they voting as per the Constitution? Are they assessing the constitutionality of actions? Is my DREP actually representing my interests, or are they completely voting? They tell me they vote this way and then they do the exact opposite. Right? So it's really up to the ADA holder, and in this liquid democratic model on Cardano, they can instantaneously move the delegation from the DREPs. They can also choose another SPO if they also vote against their interests when it comes to hard forks or security parameters. So it's really up to the ADA holder.
ADA holder. Yeah.
So participation in governance is a requirement. Civically minded, you must be. You're not. It's not going to work. We have a liquid democratic model. It requires participation. So my question is going to be: what is going to be the sticky government stake? We don't know that yet. We do know what the sticky stake looks like in stake pools, and we know it's real. We know it's a problem. There are stake pools that have tens of millions of ADA sitting in them that are gone. They're not making blocks anymore. So sticky stake is a real issue that we're going to have to deal with for delegated representatives as well. My take personally, I did apply for the ICC. I ran and I didn't quite make it. I was close, but I didn't quite make it. Fine. So I became a DREP. I will not be a stake pool operator. I will not be on the ICC. I will only be a DREP. I'm choosing that. And I think that's in some ways like the single pool, multi-pool argument, where you can wear it as a badge of honor either way. Some people are proudly multi-pool, some are proudly single pool. That's fine. I'm proudly only a DREP and not taking on the other forms of the government.
Thank you. Thank you. Einstein, just one moment. You mentioned their potential conflict of interest earlier in your answer. We know, I mean, in the sticky stake, I'm addressing both of those, because the problem here is, and this is a challenge that we all have to think about. We have to come up with a solution. Sticky stake, that's real. Conflict of interest, that's human nature, right? So we know that the CC, or currently ICC, I think their role is more or less good, perfectly defined. You know, so I don't think there's going to be a sense of conflict of interest, because what that would do, it would just lead to a vote of no confidence. But a stake pool operator could be a DREP. A stake pool operator could vote in his direction, in a particular direction. I mean, he holds, on one hand, as a stake pool operator running his own operation. On that side, there's a voting power that he has, particular, let's say, governance action steering in his direction that he favors, but then he's a DREP as well, or she is a DREP as well, can also vote in that direction, potentially conflict of interest. And that's what I meant when I said having, or let's say partaking in multiple branches of the governance bodies. How do we tackle that? do we want that? How do we as a community discourage this type of behavior? Can we do that?
It's tough.
It's tough.
It's
I know.
tough. This is a
But these are the discussions. These are the conversations we need to have.
AC, go ahead.
First of all, like, actually even a constitutional member can be in conflict of interest. So we had an example, the Hosky in Info Action, and we actually had an abstaining constitutional member because they were related to the project. And why is that a problem? Because it could hurt the legitimacy of the rulings of the Constitutional Council. They can ask, like, was it based on you being part of that project, how you wrote your rationale or not? So better abstain. But I agree with you, you identify the potential biggest issue, and the way we have usually done things in Cardano is not through penalizing, it's through encouraging the positive behavior. And the key to this all relates to the sticky stake. So if we're actually able to, for the ADA holders, to make sure to educate them and make sure that they request from their delegate representative some proper disclosures. And we don't need to go full on identity, but there's great tools like for even communicating through your address, just showing that activity and communicating how you do, then you're held accountable. And the community will find out. We see this with staking pools. Like you just produce double the same block through two different validators, you're easily shamed on pool tools, for example, right? The exact same social mechanisms to encourage the positive behavior and really incentivizing that is going to drive us forward in terms of this. So I predict, and we are going to, in the civics committee, really like track those metrics, like look at how many are both staking developers and delegate representatives, and really work on educating the community and letting more people step up and being just a staking developer or just a DREP. Over time, this is going to really go down. And I'm not saying that you should not be both. I think it's great, especially now we have early days, we need all the DREPs we can. So over time, I think that's how we reduce this problem.
Nicholas.
And just really quickly, right? I mean, DREPs start with a voting power of 0. So it's not that if an SPO registers, maybe for those who don't know, right, that they just get immediately the same voting power that they have as a pool. So they start with 0, and then they also need to, again, attract delegation. And by being transparent, right, following standards voluntarily, right, following a code of conduct, disclosing that in their metadata, these are things that, can improve this experience for the ADA holders, right?
Yes, exactly.
So there's a couple of issues here that we still quite haven't gotten to with it. And I like this because this question is important.
Yes.
As a stake pool operator, there's actually a consideration they have to make about the risk that they're assuming by also being a DREP. So this is one of the education pieces that we really do have to get out there.
Yes.
I'm a stake pool operator, and there's an unpopular but very necessary action that the DREPs are going to have to vote on. As the SPO, do you risk losing stake both as a DREP and as an SPO? Because you very well likely will. If you're on the wrong side of that issue,
Correct.
You could lose both stake.
Unless we're still dealing with the sticky stake issue.
Yes, we're still dealing with sticky stake.
And we know that is actually a fact.
Yes. So it's a combination issue where you could have losing all of your stake, or on both of your forms of delegation, if you're voting on the wrong side of an issue. So you take on risk there, and then the community continues to take on the risk of voting in self-interest when a DREP is also an SPO. So there's risk that's being shared here and traded around, and we don't have a good model for it yet. But I think that part of the education will go a long way. So I like where you're going in civics, where you guys are actually going to track these metrics, because we can actually define a risk model around those metrics and then start to look for ways to improve it.
So you guys really have to start working together, basically. That's what you're saying.
Collaboration.
Collaboration, exactly. Okay, so before we move on to the following segment, I do want to give the audience the time or a chance to ask a question, if you do have. Is there anyone with a particular question?
So I want to bring central exchanges into the discussion, because they hold a lot of stake and they have completely different interests, even different from the constitution. So how do you think that central exchanges will participate in this governance?
So centralized exchanges have legal risk as custodians, right? So if they're voting on behalf of others or they're voting for themselves. And one model that some exchanges could do is to flag and with their metadata say that they're going to abstain. And I also heard signals from exchanges that many are planning to abstain. I think the other very sustainable model over time is where actually you as a custodian ask the consent of the one you're custodian for delegating to specific DREPs, for example. So it's definitely technically possible. You can create these wallets where you still have the custodial opportunity, but where the staking key goes directly to DREP, and where all the individual customers of that exchange actually could delegate to a DREP. So that's another very fruitful path for that. But I think like in the early days of governance, honestly, let's be real about it, exchanges also look at like what takes the least amount of effort for them and what reduces the risk for them.
That's right.
And that is likely going to be abstain. So when we look at the governance model, we need to account for that in terms of how many the active participation rate is.
Okay, so and I've looked at the risk with the centralized exchange model, and right now, to my best feeling, the centralized exchanges interests far outweigh doing anything hinky on chain right now. They don't want to give up their position within the community because they also seem to be going along with the direction. They wouldn't be doing the work of doing the hard forks if they weren't going along with us. So that's a big part of this, is that they have to participate in every hard fork. So they are doing the work as SPOs, and so they won't do things right now to jeopardize it. Future, different story maybe.
Yep. Thank you. Would you like to respond, Israel?
Yeah, I mean, right, when we think about centralized exchanges, the ideal scenario would be, of course, that you have, I mean, in your, I don't know, Binance account or whatever exchange you have, MBX, that you are able to directly delegate and choose your DREP via that application, right? So you can choose and participate in governance even on that level. That's a wish. That's very difficult. But ideally, right, and also that I've also heard that from conversation with exchanges, they also want to, of course, do not take on additional risk, right? They want to keep, they still want to participate with upgrading nodes and voting abstain, even ideally only once, so automatically abstaining, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, for me, the future ideal scenario is that you can also participate in governance via the interface of the exchanges.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. There's one more question. I'm just going to allow one more question for now. Alex, please.
Hey guys, thanks so much for the discussion. I'm not fully educated on this particular topic, and I'd love to understand a little bit more. When it comes to the Constitutional Committee, right, that is the ultimate kind of guardrail against something that is unconstitutional,
yes,
on-chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, like, is it possible to actually have a no confidence vote? My first question is it possible to have a no confidence vote while we are still in the interim setup? And if yes, if not, what is the delta between what is feasible, what could theoretically happen if we have to say we have no confidence in this Constitutional Committee versus that actually being something that is implementable? And should we not as a community, if it's doable in the interim phase, actually test this out in a live setting to see whether this is something that can happen? My fear is we know that theoretically this is something that we would kind of rely on, but we've often seen the difference between theory and practice, especially at the social layer, like Lloyd said, about making sticky stake.
Yes.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about this, please. Thank you.
So let's keep in mind it's a blockchain. Ultimately, the staking pool operators could hard fork with their stake and change it, no matter what's in the constitutional rules. Yes, you're absolutely right in identifying that issue. And it's actually something that was brought up in Longmont. We we discussed that, and we also discussed this potential. What if we don't ratify before the deadline, 31 January? That's also like a potential deadlock scenario. And again, our answer to both of those was like, ultimately, we can actually implement a hard fork and change the rules. So it is possible as ADA holder to express that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you also, Einstein. Thank you for the question, both of you. Unfortunately, we only had time for 2 questions during this segment. So we'll move on to the following segment, which is more about the technical expertise and on-chain decision-making. A mouthful, I know. So technical decision-making on Cardano governance will likely require input from subject matter experts. But we all know it's not cheap, it's not free. That comes at a cost. So these experts, I'm just wondering, should there not be a dedicated annual budget to cover costs for research? I'm going to look at you, Lloyd. Yes.
Come on over. Yeah, first of all, yes, there is actually a bucket for research. One of the 5 buckets that we defined was research. With, Cardano is founded on research.
Yes.
Again, what did we pick for our 5 buckets? We picked things that are already doing. And the things that we were already doing were research. And so that's a big part of it. And also, as far as the subject matter experts go, each committee has been asked to create a budget for the subject matter experts needed to continue their tasks. TSC, the Technical Steering Committee, is a great example because they have contracts that they're writing that maybe 3 people on the planet can read the contract, understand it, and then look at code that was written for it and be able to confirm that that's that. So they have to pay one of those experts to do it. Exactly. So in advance, they know they're going to have to do that so many times during the year, and that's been documented, and that is part of the annual budget process, are those subject matter experts. And also, by the way, the same thing for the committee members. The reimbursement or stipends for the committee members is also included in the annual budget, because all of this it's a human cost. We have to show up and we have to do the work. So we all have to pay our light bills and we all have to take care of all those things.
Of
so
course.
we have to make sure that we are compensating the people doing the work and doing it fairly.
Exactly. That makes perfect sense. Einstein, sure.
Yeah, so I'm so deep into the Constitution, that's my passion, but really the Constitution also expresses these needs for technical reviews. There is requirements, for example, Article 3, Section 6 goes straight into this, like a requirement for the hard fork to actually have that technical report. It is also expressed through the principles and the tenets, like expediently, for example, like what is expedient? Well, you actually need to have something to pair against, and that actually need technical expertise. So yes, it's absolutely needed, and it's done through that budget process, making sure that's a healthy process that also includes what's required by the Constitution.
I love it when they quote articles and sections to me.
I noticed exactly the same. I'm like, did you actually did that? Like, I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, but yeah, that's good. Okay, so I didn't want to spend too much time on this segment, but because I do believe we could go on about this in terms of, let's say, DREP compensation. I think that is something that it's not clear, because there will be more than 10 DREPs. At some point, there will be more than 100 DREPs.
There are
potentially
400 right now.
400 at this moment.
Yes.
Potentially, we could be seeing 1,000 or more DREPs.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you compensate 1,000 DREPs?
The good news is I get to defer this to these gentlemen who happen to be sitting on the civics committee.
Okay.
The most important thing is budget does not make these decisions. Budget collates the decisions from the other committees and then designs the budget around what the other committees and other entities give us. Yes. So these gentlemen have the unenviable task of helping to define what DREP compensation is going to look like,
the honors
because they're
are
on the
theirs,
civics
basically.
committee.
Okay. Nicholas, please enlighten us.
Yeah, so I'm not going to share now the DREP compensation model that's going to solve everything. Okay. Sorry. But I think when we talk about these discussions about DREP compensation, right, there's a lot of different opinions about, should we just reward the top 100 based on stake? Should we just compensate DREPs for the transactions that they submit and at least reimburse them basically? Or should there be some reward for the DREPs who are actually researching, doing a lot of work basically, reviewing governance actions, coming up with their opinions, writing rationales? That takes a lot of work. I'm part of the ICC in the Cardano Foundation, and that also takes a lot of work. But DREP compensation is that is a discussion and something that ultimately I believe the community should decide, right? And and what we need to understand is, at least that's what I was thinking, if we don't have an incentive model in place, then we can, at least I assume, that at the end of the day, DREPs will just come together, form their own, create their own treasury withdrawal and just get it themselves. But maybe that's not the most ideal way, right? For me personally, and I'm just speaking for me, is I would like to see an incentive model that is implemented in the protocol, that is actually like we do it for SPOs and delegators, and not have something that is as elastic or as just via the budget or via the treasury.
Interesting.
I can build on that. If you have time.
Sure, please.
Okay. So I agree. It's also a legal issue in terms of actively distributing versus actually the protocol giving rewards.
Yeah.
But one of the responsibility of the civics committee is to have this stewardship. So we're trying to be enablers. So I believe there's a budget part that we actually have set aside. So if the community wants to compensate the DREPs, we have that option through that budget. And that's how we start. Because it's a principal discussion of should we have DREPs that are rewarded for creating effective governance, or should it be based on their, let's say, their benefits of doing the votes? And if you go towards that path of only rewarding them for the benefits of the awards, you get into all kinds of problems like collusion and voting on behalf of projects instead of behalf of the community. So I'm also, now speaking personally, also heavily leaning toward a incentive model and ending with the protocol rewards. But what I'm saying is now it's actually, there's a pot there for community to decide and to use with different distribution models. Up to you as a community.
I love the way how you build on that by eloquently saying, I disagree with you. You know, it's interesting. It's interesting. You did that really, really well. Just before we move on to this last segment, right? I do want to thank you all. Absolutely, this is the final segment, and I think this is a very important one. But thank you all really for your insights. It's really important. As I mentioned, there's a lot of challenges that we will deal with. We are not yet confronted with, but we know at some point we will have to deal with it. And it's good to have those conversations also now. The last segment is really about sustainability. I was really happy. I mean, Einstein, when you opened, you mentioned about sustainable, making the treasury sustainable.
Full circle.
Yes, but and then I said, let's hope he doesn't really continue on that, because you know that's like, oh my, it's my segment. But I think it's safe that we touch on that. You know, we all know that Catalyst, right? Catalyst is not sustainable. What do I mean by that? Catalyst relies on treasury withdrawals. Receive those funds and redistribute that as grants to projects via the Catalyst funding round. If the treasury says no, then there is a problem. It's likely to say yes. Of course, communities likely to say yes or vote for it. But it just shows how, let's say, how vulnerable they are. When it comes to the treasury, should we not think about making the treasury more sustainable? I mean, I have thought about it. I thought about options, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Because eventually, yes, the reserves will be depleted at some point. Mm-hmm. And if we're having this annual budget, at some point, yes, we'll see that just, depleting, and there's nothing, we're not getting anything for that in return. So how do you actually make the treasury sustainable?
I can give that one a go.
Lloyd, please.
So a couple things that we're doing right now. We actually have we are in the process of forming a treasury working group within the budget committee. We're bringing forward some experts who that's what they do. They manage and maintain treasuries. They're not, and not just Cardano folks, people that maintain treasuries at universities and things like that.
Experts,
Experts, right?
yes.
Subject matter experts on
Yes.
that. Because treasuries do exist. It's not something that's new, right?
Of course.
And people manage treasuries all the time. Well, you can successfully manage a treasury so that you maintain your principal and only spend your interest. It's kind of what we're doing now in a way, and we can continue to do things of that nature. We can be very wise if we see another bull market, that'd be great. I'm looking for one. If anybody sees one around, if we see another bull market, we could do something where we do a withdrawal that makes sense, that gives us a lot of fiat that we can then safely run through the next bear market after that and have funds to spend through bear. We can do any of that kind of things if we choose to. So what the job of this Treasury Working Group is going to be is to figure out what are the best options to use, the safest, so that we can, as a community, agree on some of them, and then choose to use some of those options to continue to maintain our treasury over time.
Yeah.
So that's the goal already, is can we have that conversation and find a good role?
Yeah, sure. Einstein.
Yeah,
please.
so to build upon that, I think there are two principal things we should discuss there. Number one is like active or passive treasury management.
Yes.
But the other part of it is actually like, how do we think about treasuries? So you talk about buckets where we have different streams of how we distribute. But there's actually this really cool feature now. You can actually donate back to the treasury. I believe Ryan did it once. There's at least one donation. I will donate as well. But the thing is, you could have treasuries where you actually have a loan or you have a grant that's actually paid back to the treasury. And then you have a very, very interesting other type of treasury model. So exploring different treasuries and possibly doing it safe in smaller pilots, I think is really the way forward in creating sustainability. And combine that with some form of active treasury management, so we're not only dependent on the transactions piece making us sustainable, we have a much more robust.
Why did I ask this? Because Nicholas, you also mentioned having a treasury that will be here for decades and generations to come. So having a good active treasury management system, a team also of experts, subject matter experts, matters. It's important. And but let's not have that conversation tomorrow. Let's have that conversation today. Because tomorrow we will be confronted with other challenges, and we need to be prepared for that.
Yes.
So I'm just going to turn to the audience, because I can imagine at this point that you probably have been gathering questions. And I do want to open up the floor to allow you to also ask the panelists some very challenging questions that you, based on their answers, of course, in the segments that we've presented.
You spoke about 300 to 500 million that you want to spend. The DREPs can vote on that, or is that already fixed?
The DREPs absolutely will vote on that. We're going to have a net change limit vote first. In the net change limit vote, we're going to express what we're actually going to work with the DREPs before we do anything. First of all, there's currently a DREP working group that is bringing in the DREPs for discussions. There's 4 meetings set up during November where we're going over all these processes and all the potential spend. Our job is to take the feedback from the DREPs back to the committees and see if they need to adjust any of their budgets before the final net change limit is put out as an info action. And then once that one succeeds, if it succeeds, then we would put out an annual info action for the budget that would be very detailed. It would lay out everything that was intended to go. It would be buckets, it would be the remit of the buckets, and what treasury actions would be taken in order to complete it. It would be all listed in the info action. And then the DREPs vote on that info action. If that succeeds, and only when that succeeds, do we actually put a treasury action forward. So it's a 3-step process.
I heard from the professor that about, he said about 400 DREPs, about 4% of the market at the moment are voting. I think for the first year we should blame, I think the income was 360 million last year.
That was last year. This year it's up to 4. It's 4 something. We're looking for. We did increase utility, therefore we increased income.
Yeah.
So we're at 4 something. There's no crystal ball, but the numbers pointing toward 4 something.
Yeah, but that's with the transaction fees going up, the income.
That's
but,
right.
From the monetary expansion is going down every time. It's about 324.
It's all included. It's both the monetary expansion and the transactions. Now we do keep them separate because we want to actually see, obviously, as monetary expansion is going down, we need to see transaction fees going up.
Yeah.
And we need that line to cross it a good way. So that is exactly, that's exactly what our worst nightmare in the budget. What I wake up with sweating is, that we don't do this right and we don't have the transaction fees start to replace the.
Yeah, because I think it's calculated by 31 and about 1 billion left in for staking rewards. So that's about 200 million left for the treasury.
Yep.
Because I come from finance and. I see this as a decentralized company. Okay, we have to see with the security laws and everything like that. But we cannot print Cardano anymore.
That's right. You should show up to the budget meetings. come to some of these open working sessions we're going to have.
That's actually a good invitation.
Money, they can print more shares, but we can't.
That's right.
No, of course.
So we have to make sure that what we get in, we spend, and we don't spend more. Especially not where the market is low at the moment.
Why don't you bring your expertise to that committee? Because the thing is, being part of the Cardano ecosystem, there's this thing that we say, all hands on deck. Of course, we do need the good hands. We do need the experts, the people with the knowledge, the background, the skills, right, to contribute. Because remember, we cannot succeed if no one actually participates. Participation is key. So please, accept the invitation. There was another question I saw next to you, I believe. Yeah, we'll come to you, sure.
So you said voting of centralized exchanges is a problem of the future, but in some DeFi projects are already voting on catalysts with their clients' money.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do, first of all, in Catalyst, but also what if they decide to do it as DRAP?
That's a very good question. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I mean, right, the thing is, in a public permissionless system like we're in, again, and I sound like a broken record sometimes, but if we really block specific addresses or specific actors to not vote, right, where does this stop? This can quickly turn into, we don't allow these kind of people, these kind of religions, whatever, right? We do not want that. The key really is education, so that the people who are depositing and have liquidity on these DEXs or in other lending protocols, that they're aware that they're now giving away this extra utility. Because ADA now in this decentralized governance model gained a whole nother level of utility, right? You can govern the system. It's not just for securing the network and transacting on the network, but it's now really also to govern the system. Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, some people, they just want to sell their voting power for a quick return, right? But if they are aware of it and if they know that they're giving up their voting rights, I think then it's again the self-sovereign ADA holder that can make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quickly add to that. So in the drafting, we're also discussing like the separation between ADA owner and ADA holder, right? So the one who holds the ADA may not necessarily be the owner of that ADA. You can actually separate the voting power, but the problem with that is how do you track that and how do you enforce that? So the real issues again, to your point, like it's the ADA holder holding them accountable. So if you are on these exchanges and they don't vote abstain and they don't do what the community thinks is proper governance, that is how you make sure it's effective governance. So the key is education.
And if I can add just very quickly, in fairness, there are some dApps who have already taken this into account and already allow voting on how the vote will happen. They're using their own stake, their own governance inside using their token that says, hey, tell us how we should vote with all this ADA that we have collectively. So at a minimum, you have that collective decision making happening. So
I'm going to thank you for that question because you obviously released the dragon here. So thank you very much.
That's a good question.
Very well. Okay, there's another one here. Please, we'll come to you, sir. We'll come to you.
Thank you for the presentation and panel. It's very interesting. I have a more general question. What is the risk that while we are experimenting the new governance model with the chambers and so on, that we actually somehow, there is always the risk of dying in the process because we are slower. I come from a very decentralized country where it's democracy really tested since 700 years.
Is that Switzerland?
That's right.
Okay.
There's a big advantage to that. So it's stable. It grows slowly but steadily. But we're living in a tech world that moves very fast. So do we have the agility to respond to opportunities, maybe within the treasury, that in case there's a bull market, that we can react and provide funds to the dynamic parts of the community, and so forth. So it's the risk of, as Professor Tessone said, there's also the risk of dying if we are too slow.
Absolutely.
That is a very good question.
It is. And if you don't mind, there's a couple things we have in mind, if you will. First, the idea that we would have a certain amount in the net change limit that maybe is above what the budget actually is. So that gives you a degree of flexibility. Again, we don't want to go outside of that safe range that the treasurers are telling us is safe, but we also don't have to spend everything at that safety margin. If you're in the military, you're accustomed to running things at 80% rather than at 100% because you need that extra overhead for when you need it.
Yes.
So we try to, the idea here is to try to live very much within our means and have that extra, because that would allow us to say as a community, hey, we think this is a good idea. What do you guys say? That's an info action and a treasury action away. That's 6 weeks for an info action and no more than 5 to 10 days for a treasury action following a 6-week info action. So that's a pretty rapid response. We actually do have a rapid system here.
Sounds to me like they have a pretty responsible treasury management, at least being set up. So it's, but that's a very good question. Einstein also wants to respond to that.
This question actually keeps me up at night. I'm way more concerned about this than I'm concerned with that we misuse the law. Because if we have that active participation, we safeguard everything. So in the civics committee, we have the stewardship, and we're ensuring that we keep alive the system. So take, for example, like the tooling we're using, like some of the SBOs, it's quite hard for them to vote. They're used to handling like a CAS refresh, that's a technical term, but once every 90 days they refresh some of their security keys, and that's where they're hands-on. Like, how do we ensure we educate them so they're actually participating and able to vote quick enough, as you mentioned. And the same is for the delegators. Some of these wallets we have, we need to change and make them even more user-friendly to quickly be able to delegate. That is actually the question keeping me up as well. And that's why in the civics committee we are doing like metrics on this and really making sure that we encourage this and see that it's actually, let's take the delegators again. Like, if you vote only on a single topic, but you're elsewhere inactive as a DREP, like, how would that type of DREP respond in such a system with the mass quick responses? So you need to measure that and make sure that the help is there. You need to educate people on who are the DREPs that are actually voting on all the governance actions.
Yes.
And to just really, really quickly, two, 3 sentences about that. For me, right, how can we quickly react is what we need for that is to have the necessary governance user experience. So the tooling that allows that.
Yeah.
That people are quickly informed about if something goes terribly wrong, right? You should not be depending on someone's X account because he's just having his own block performance monitoring system. But no, it should be available, that information, and then people can quickly react, right? But it requires the knowledge about where to find the information, and it should be easily accessible.
I think I really need to use a different type of ink, because you actually read like what's on my paper here when it comes to like seriously governance, tooling, and education. But I think that's a great question. So thank you for that, sir. You also had a question, please.
First of all, thank you for all that you're doing for Cardano. If I really look at other blockchains, I see that we are way ahead in terms of governance. So yes, a big thank you for all your efforts. What I would like to know is, are there any guardrails in the constitution or any budget for protection of the ICC members or the DLEPs, because they are doxed now? So if tomorrow any corporation or any anti-crypto country or say any government institution, the Fed for example, decides to litigation against the doxed members, how can we protect ourselves? Is there anything in
Good question. Yeah. Okay.
Can I start on that one? Legal resilience is something we in civics think about, and we even set aside in the budget like for having administration support in terms of this. And one interesting thing we know in how all of these committees members have formed is actually they form councils that's actually across different geographical regions, even inside in the council itself, and they represent one vote, one member. So if you're supposed to actually enforce something on that whole council, and most of them are operating like, say, as a separate corporation or something, so it's not a personal responsibility, then you actually have a really hard time in doing that quickly. And in the meantime, you could reorganize. So this concept of legal resilience across geographic distribution is actually really important for that issue you're raising. Absolutely.
Lloyd.
We had a conversation at a couple of one of the Constitution drafting task forces where we actually had a subject matter expert on that particular topic, and there was a lot of back and forth. But in the end, it was that by building your own legal resilience, that you ended up protecting it. And so each of the CC members, when their onboarding happened, they were taught, here's what you need. D-reps were going through and teaching them what they need if they want to do this successfully. Now, we can't give them legal advice, but civics is working on that possibility. Open source is also working on that possibility, where there's certain amounts of legal guidance that can be purchased as open source and then shared out so that it's available, so we can have a form of best practice, and that form of best practice is going to be your best defense against that at this point, because anything else that we do right now, it's simply not enforceable. There's not a means for us to enforce it right now.
Very good question as well.
Thank you.
I think, by the way, are there any more questions before I continue? There's one more here. Thank you there. Okay, so I think the questions that you all have asked until now, I think what you've realized is that, oh, I have a question. Did you guys actually thought of that? And then you said, oh, well, actually, we are actually working on that. Well, we actually thought of that. Oh, we actually have a term for it. What did you call that? Treasury resilience or
Legal resilience.
legal resilience?
It's an academic paper on it, but yeah.
So it shouldn't be a surprise. It should now become apparent to everyone here, that there's a massive amount of work being put in. There's a lot of considerations being made. People are looking at this from many different angles and actually really sitting down, having those tough conversations, those tough decisions to come to design.
Yes.
When designing an on-chain model, it should be clear that it's not just, hey, let's just hold some ADA, we can trade that, we can sell it. There's a massive responsibility here. When someone says, hey, you know what? That actually keeps me awake at night sometimes. I think it's clear that that's passion. It says, I wake up and sweat because I think, oh, darn, what's going to happen with the treasury if this happens, or if we forget to do that, or we didn't consider that. That's passion. Those are the people that you want guarding, or let's say writing those guardrails, helping to shape the future of Cardano.
So when I attended a constitution workshop, there was a question which I had that as they gave more utility to ADA as a governance token, we are foregoing, we are trading the currency part. They want to use ADA as a currency to buy the products, to use the services made on the blockchain. Because I don't want to use USDA stable coins. That's why I chose ADA as a currency. But if I use it as a currency, I forgo my voting rights, my staking rights. So how can we maintain a balance on that? But if I cannot trade the currency, it's not a currency anymore. Like I need to something else to trade the stuff. So how can I maintain my voting rights with also having the money to use the thing?
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
But who wants to take that?
I'll bite.
Go ahead.
Go
I've got
ahead.
something too, but go right ahead.
I love that question. So the thing is, like, the security parameters is the reason why we have one ADA, one vote, and why we tie the vote to the currency itself. Because if not, then you risk breaking the system the 51% attack. Let's say you vote on protocol parameters to say have 0 blocks as the total number of blocks produced. If you can do that with less than one ADA, one vote, then you can circumvent this 51% attack. So let's keep that in mind for the rest of my answer. There are so many research and methods being looked into now, for example, into partner chains and what type of votes they can inherit from the layer 1. We are also looking into like how to create more inclusive voting systems. So for example, we have Intersect, a membership-based organization. It is the one that does all of this off-chain process making and creating its budget, and where we have one member, one vote. So you still have that voting power in that process. And ultimately, if that is a very legitimate process, even if you hold small amounts of ADA and use it all for trading, you're still heavily influencing the process because you're part of making that budget. So the system has some built-in mechanism against it, but it's absolutely a topic that we really need to keep pushing on and inventing new voting methods and how we look at voting compared with the base used to be.
I think Lloyd also constantly mentioned, I think if pay attention, subject matter experts.
Yes.
So I'm pretty sure that all of these different committees, they're really trying to see if they can attract the people who really understands that in that particular field, who has a particular expertise or experience, knowledge, who are educated on that front. I think this is a very good point when we can wrap it up. Einstein, it's been a pleasure really sitting here on this panel with you. Nicholas, it's been an honor. Lloyd, the same.
Thank you.
You guys are more than just governance champions. The road ahead of you is, I'm happy that I'm walking with you, but I'm also happy that I'm not in your shoes. It sounds strange, but the thing is, you all three mentioned at some point that education is extremely important. Extremely important. We didn't do that well in the current staking model when it comes to sticky stake, but we have an opportunity to not make the same mistake again when it comes to the on-chain governance model. But getting that right, that's a challenge in itself. So there's a lot on your shoulders, but I have full confidence just listening to you, how you tackle the questions here. And I'm confident that had we been in a much larger audience, of course there would be more questions, but it would also be clear to the audience that, wow, the people actually who are behind this and all of those different committees, it is in good hands. Because you're considering all of these different things that people, you probably might not have heard of it. No one probably might not have told you it. But now that you have the opportunity to ask because you didn't know, you understand, hey, we've actually thought of that. Don't let today be a full stop, but let's please continue the conversation, because it's only if we all participate that Cardano's on-chain governance, that the new era that we're in, can and will become a success. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Denicio.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Denicio. Great job. Thank you.